It's a beautiful springtime afternoon here at the Sydney affiliate office of the Blanco Lirio channel. Sunday, the 22nd of October, means it's fall, and Saturday, the 21st of October, back home. We've got two high profile NTSB preliminary reports to talk about today on the channel that we've been covering. One from the 757 gear up landing in Chattanooga, Tennessee, and the other on the loss of Richard McSpadden in the Cessna Cardinal, Lake Placid, New York. Let's check it out. Let's start first with the 757 out of Chattanooga, where this sounds like this is a pretty clear case of a dual system failure, or two system failures happening that caused the gear to not extend. On October 4th of 2023, the FedEx flight from Chattanooga, Tennessee to Memphis. The airplane turned back to Chattanooga, and while preparing to land, the landing gear failed to extend normally. The landing gear also failed to extend using the alternate extend system. The flight crew declared an emergency, and the airplane sustained substantial damage during the emergency landing. The two flight crew members and the jump seat occupant aboard the airplane were not injured, and it was operated under FAR Part 121 Airlines cargo flight. The flight crew reported there were no maintenance issues before the flight, and the pushback engine start were all uneventful. According to the flight crew, after rotation and confirmation of a positive rate of climb, the first officer, FO, raised the landing gear control lever to retract the landing gear. The captain was the pilot flying, and the first officer was the pilot monitoring. The data recorder showed that both main gear and the nose gear retracted to their up and locked position. About 1 minute later, the flap handle was positioned to its up, flap 0 position. The flight crew reported that immediately thereafter, a trailing edge flap disagree message was displayed on the engine indication and crew alerting system, the ICAS system, along with an associated master caution light, a trailing edge discrete light, and the aural alert caution beeper. Per the captain's discretion, the first officer began accomplishing the trailing edge flap disagree checklist via the QRH. And that's what I mentioned in the first report, is that oftentimes these hydraulic system failures will begin with a flight control problem with the secondary flight control, something with the flaps or the slats. The first officer was able to retract the flaps to their up position via alternate means in accordance with the appropriate checklist contained in the QRH. That mean they electrically raised the flaps? Not sure. While completing this checklist, the flight crew received, now you get the big messages, left hydraulic system pressure ICAS message, and at 22, 24, 33 at an altitude of about 1,978 feet above ground level. The status page showed the left hydraulic system fluid quantity was near zero and the system was not pressurized. The captain directed the first officer to run the QRH checklist for left hydraulic pressure system, and the flight crew decided to return to Chattanooga. The flight crew members then asked Chattanooga Approach if they could conduct a low approach over the runway to see if they could see their landing gear at about 150 feet, and they indicated that no, they could not see any landing gear down. Subsequently, the flight crew completed the deferred items on the gear unsafe QRH, quick reaction handbook, checklist, and the airplane was cleared to land on runway 20 with the gear up. The flight crew members reported that during the initial touchdown, the airplane bounced slightly, and we saw that on some of the videos, just a little bit of a bounce, but they were able to maintain directional control and the runway centerline. The flight crew was unable to stop the airplane, and it slid off the departure end of the runway and impacted localizer antennas before coming to a rest about 830 feet beyond the end of the runway. See Figure 1. They're right on the center line, about 830 feet off the end of the runway, and it looks like the one right slide deployed. Now check this part of the this is a bad day at the office. After the airplane came to a complete stop, the flight crew performed the evacuation checklist, and the jump seat occupant, remember there were 3 people on board, including a jump seater, attempted, I don't know if he was just catching a ride to work or if he was part of the working crew, and the jump seat occupant attempted to open the left-hand L1 door. The door rotated halfway open and then became bound, and the slide did not deploy. Figure 2, upper photo. And Here's the one left door. This is the one where they subsequently got the ladder on it. The jump seat occupant then attempted to open the right-hand door, R1, but it became lodged on the packing of the raft slide. The jump seat occupant subsequently forced the door open and the slide deployed. The flight crew and the jump seat occupant then egressed the airplane via the one right door slide. Right there. So, man, just multiple problems all in one evening's flight. Post-accident examination of the airplane revealed that the left main landing gear door actuator retract port hose was leaking hydraulic fluid, and the hose was removed and retained by the NTSB for further examination. The examination also found a discontinuity in the wiring of the landing gear alternate extension. Remember, the landing gear alternate extension uses DC power, probably either directly from the battery or battery bus, to move a small hydraulic pump to take some trapped fluid from the left system to open the gear doors and release the locks to the landing gear so the landing gear can gravity fall. But there was an electrical problem with that circuit. And that section of that wire was returned for further examination. And this is pretty common in previous hydraulic failures of the Boeing aircraft. It's often these flexible hoses in the landing gear system that fail, causing the loss of hydraulic fluid. And I assume that it was because it was this flex hose on the doors explains why the PTU, or power transfer unit, could not do its job of taking, that would be right system fluid, to take trapped right system fluid pressure to move trapped left fluid to open up the doors and unlock the gear. The following, let's see. So data recorders and cockpit voice recorders were removed and will be studied further. A couple of points, a couple of questions. Remember, this is probably the first time I've ever heard of a Boeing 757 being completely unable to unlock and lower the gears. Remember, the crew was talking with dispatch and maintenance and getting all the people on board that they could to try to get this gear down before they ended up landing gear up. And they were a little bit time compressed because this was such a short flight, only a 1 hour flight, and their radio call indicated that they only had about an hour and a half of fuel on board. And regarding the redundancy of the Boeing 777 system, remember, millions and millions of landings and cycles and hours have been flown on these aircraft, and this is the first time I've heard of it not working on a 757. Of course, everybody remembers the 767 lot aircraft, where the circuit breaker to the alternate gear extension was found in the out position. But that does not appear to be the case in this case. Regarding the aircraft, will they ever use it again? You can rebuild any aircraft at any time, given enough time and money. A lot of these historic aircraft, all we retain is a data plate, and we basically recreate the entire aircraft. It becomes a money thing, a financial thing. Will this aircraft be rebuilt? Probably not, because it's towards the end of its life expectancy anyways, and it's sustained substantial damage, and it probably will be parted out. Now on to the tragic loss of Richard McSpadden and Russ Francis in the Cessna 177 Cardinal in Lake Placid, New York. Remember, this Cessna Cardinal is a RG, a retractable gear model of Cardinal, and it's powered by the IO 360 Lycoming engine, 200 horsepower, fuel-injected, constant-speed propeller engine on this aircraft. The purpose of the flight was to photograph the accident airplane while airborne for later publication in a magazine article. Remember, there were two aircraft departing. There was a Beechcraft Bonanza photo ship was to take off first, and then the 177 was going to take off second, and they were going to feature this aircraft apparently in an AOPA article. According to witnesses, there were two airplanes that made up the flight. The lead aircraft was a Beech A-36 with a photographer on board, which took off first from runway 32, so they departed to the north. Initial reports indicated that they were departing to the south at Lake Placid Airport, Lake Placid, New York. The accident aircraft took off about 700 feet behind the Beech A-36. The pilot owner was to fly the airplane during the takeoff and climb out. That would be Russ Francis in the left seat with Richard McSpadden in the right seat. The pilot owner was to fly the airplane during the takeoff and climb out, and after joining up in formation, the pilot rated passenger, that'd be McSpadden, would have taken over the controls and flown the airplane during the photo shoot. Because remember, McSpadden was the former Thunderbird pilot and had the military formation flying experience. During taxi out, witnesses heard the engine of the accident airplane running when the Beech A-36 pulled up next to it. The accident airplane's engine then shut off, and about 10 seconds later, the engine restarted. During the takeoff roll, a witness described that the engine sounded as if the propeller was set for climb and not for takeoff, and then heard the engine surge. During the initial climb, the witness further described that the engine did not sound as if it was running at full power. The accident airplane then made a gentle left turn while it was 300 to 400 feet above the ground to join the Beech A-36. As the accident airplane closed to within about 1,000 feet of the Beech A-36, it suddenly made a hard right turn back toward the departure airport. During the turn, the pilot of the Beech A-36 heard the passenger in the accident airplane, that would be McSpadden, transmit on the common traffic advisory frequency, quote, "We have a problem and we're returning to the airport." The accident airplane subsequently impacted the embankment in a right-wing nose-low attitude about 15 feet below the top of a plateau on the airport property. The airplane then slid about 30 feet down the embankment and came to a rest on the side of the slope upright perpendicular to the embankment with its left wing oriented toward the upslope and its right wing oriented downslope. The initial impact point on the embankment was located about 440 feet from the approach end of runway 14, approximately 250 feet left of the runway centerline. The downslope angle was about 70 degrees at a ravine at its bottom. So it doesn't sound like he stalled and spun it in. It sounds like he simply came up short and hit this steep embankment. Lake Placid Airport is located at an elevation of 1,747 feet. The runway is 4,196 feet long, 60 feet wide. There are some obstructions off of the north end of the runway. The weather was good. Winds were out of the north at 7 knots. So when you make that turn back, that 7-knot headwind is going to turn to a 7-knot tailwind. 10 miles visibility, temperature 23 degrees Celsius, dew point 12, altimeter 3020. That gives you a density altitude of about a little over 2,700 feet versus the field elevation of 1,700 feet. So you're going to lose a little bit of performance in there as well. Let's see, according to the FAA records, the pilot, this is Russ, held a commercial pilot certificate. He was 70 years old at the time of the accident, with ratings for single-engine land, multi-engine land, and instrument aircraft. He also possessed a type rating for the DC-3 and private pilot privileges for rotorcraft helicopter. His most recent FAA issued second-class medical certificate was in January of 2023, so he had a good second-class medical, and that's where he reported about 9,000 total flight hours. It was a 1976 model Cessna 177 RG, had a recent annual on April 7th of 2023, and had about 5,300 hours total time, and the engine had accumulated just 36.7 hours of operation since major overhaul. Now they go into real good detail about the condition of the aircraft as they found it. They talk about a bit about the damage to the aircraft. Control cable continuity was established from flight control surfaces to the cockpit controls, so there was no problem with the flight controls. The flaps were extended approximately 10 degrees. The stabilator trim was neutral. Remember, the Cardinal has a full flying stabilator, so the trim was set correctly. The fuel strainer bowl was fractured during the impact sequence, and only a portion of it was observed, but the fuel strainer screen was clean. The fuel selector handle operated normally in all positions and positively engaging in the detents. The position of the fuel selector valve was confirmed to be on both by rotating the handle through all positions while defueling the airplane through the inlet line of the fuel strainer. The fuel caps were closed and secure. The position of the fuel pump switch could not be determined due to impact damage. There were no obstructions noted in the fuel or fuel vent system from the wing tanks to the inlet of the fuel strainer. First responders reported that fuel was draining from the airplane on arrival. No blockages were discovered in the fuel system, and 17 gallons of fuel were recovered from the right fuel wing tank. The fuel was absent any water contamination. The nose landing gear was crushed after in the impact sequence, and the actuator was separated, so its position could not be determined. But the main landing gear was observed to be in the intermediate position, so they were in the process of lowering the gear for the landing. The electrical and lighting switch positions were damaged during the impact sequence, and their positions couldn't be determined. The cowl flap handle was in the open position, that's normal for takeoff, and the mixture control was in the full rich position. The propeller control was in high RPM fine pitch position, again, which is normal for takeoff. And the throttle was out about 2 inches and bent slightly up and to the left about 30 degrees. So were they closing the throttle to come into land, or did the throttle get pushed out on the impact? The engine remained attached to the firewall through its respective engine mounts, but they had to cut the engine from its mounts in order to investigate it further. The propeller remained attached to the engine and crankshaft. The propeller spinner was impact fractured, and only half of it remained attached to the prop hub. The prop hub was found cracked and damage consistent with impact. One blade was partially dislodged from the hub. The blade exhibited leading edge scratches and gouges. The other blade was bent slightly aft at mid-span with an approximate 2-inch curled section of the tip separated. The blade exhibited chordwise scratching and leading edge gouging on the outer 1/3 of the blade. So they'll be looking at this real close to help them determine if the engine was producing any power at the time of impact. The top spark plugs were found intact, undamaged, and tightly installed in each cylinder. The top spark plugs were removed, and they did a bore scope of the cylinders. No abnormalities noted. The engine crankshaft was rotated by the prop in its normal direction of rotation. Suction and compression were noted on all the cylinders through the top spark plug holes, and all the rocker arms moved normally. All 8 spark plugs were removed, and they checked for color, and they were found to be normal to black carbon fouled with normal wear on the electrodes. No mechanical electrode damage was noted on any of the spark plugs. The bottom spark plugs, number 1 and 3, were oil soaked, but that was consistent with the orientation of the engine at the accident site and oil within the cylinders. So oil had leaked down into those 2 bottom spark plugs after the crash. The single drive magneto unit, this particular model of IO360 has that rare model of a single drive magneto system, whereas most aircraft engines have 2 separate magnetos. But it was found securely installed to the rear engine. After removal of the unit, the single drive was rotated using an electric drill, and the magneto produced spark at all the ignition leads. So nothing wrong there. No damage was observed to the magneto housing, but both ignition harnesses sustained varying levels of impact damage from the crash. The oil dipstick was found secured. The filler neck, there were 6 quarts of oil in the engine oil sump. Oil was found draining from the area of the number 3 cylinder exhaust tube that was impact damage due to the orientation of the airplane at the accident site. Oil was also found on an accessory section of the engine around the oil filter, as the oil filter had sustained a high level of impact damage and was separated from the oil filter's threaded base. So that damage was a result of the crash, not a cause of the crash. A portion of filter element was removed, examined, and found to be clean. No metallic particles or debris present. And the oil suction screen plug was found to be tight, safety wired to the oil sump, and the screen was unobstructed and clear of debris. So no problems there. Now onto the fuel injection system. It sounds like they had good fuel coming into the fuel injection system. The fuel system, including the engine-driven fuel pump, fuel manifold, and fuel servo, were all found attached to the engine at the time of the examination. The fuel pump's 45-degree outlet fitting was found slightly loose, with the mating hose tight to the fitting. No fuel staining was observed from the fitting or on the fuel pump housing itself. The fuel divider, that's the spider on top of the engine, was tightly installed to the top of the engine, and all injection lines were tight and secured to each injection nozzle. The fuel injection manifold was disassembled with no debris or tears noted to its diaphragm. The fuel servo was attached to the lower side of the engine with all lines tight and secure, but all 4 hold-down nuts were found loose when slight pressure with a wrench was applied. Torque stripes were present on the studs and nuts. The torque stripes did not appear to be disturbed or misaligned. The throttle plate was found in the closed position. When the throttle arm was actuated manually, the throttle plate moved freely within the servo, but the threaded rod for the idle thumb screw adjustment was found fractured and not connected. Again, probably post-crash damage. The fuel injection nozzles were found to be free and clear of any debris. The vacuum pump was fine, and the prop governor was found to be fine, and the screen in the prop governor was found clear and free of debris, and oil flowed from the unit when rotated by hand. So no problems with the prop governor. So more questions than answers there. Are they alluding to possibly a problem with the fuel injection system that might have led to this engine surging? This is one of those cases to me that it sounds like it was a partial engine failure. And there's nothing worse than a partial engine failure on a single engine aircraft. These are the kind of failures that could lead you down the path to more easily make the decision to attempt to return to the runway, because the engine's making power. You think you can make it until you can. So again, more questions than answers at this point. Answers that we may never get the answer to because of the lack of data in these general aviation accidents. Why did that engine quit while they were taxiing out? Sometimes if these fuel-injected engines are not set up properly with their fuel control units, they can quit like that while you're getting ready, while you're idling the engine. Thanks so much for your support of this channel, especially the folks over on Patreon that make this content possible. See you here.